here with my good friend Ari, and I'm super excited for our convo today. I just saw Ari Whitten at Mindshare last weekend, and it's always so good to see you. And
Yeah, great to see you as well.
yeah. I actually got to introduce you to a couple friends, and it's
Thank you for
getting
that.
really it's getting really fun for me to go to these events now and be more of a connector because I'm getting to know a lot of people in the community. So thanks
Yes.
for taking a few minutes with me. I know we're like barely back home and you're kind of cramming this in, as am I, before I take off on my next adventure, but this is going to be awesome.
In between baby duties, I have a brand new baby that's
You do have a brand new little cute, yummy baby. Little
yeah, nine days old as of today.
Yes, that's awesome. I think I saw some kind of post that you just had your baby, and I was actually wondering if you were going to make it to Mindshare. So that was a nice treat for all of us.
I wouldn't have, except for the fact that it's in San Diego where I live.
In
So
your
I just,
backyard? Yeah.
just drive over there in half an hour. I drive home every night.
Right. Well, it was super fun, super fun. Well, I interviewed Ari a few months ago, as you guys know, and we talked about his amazing program, the Energy Blueprint. But the number one issue that women are dealing with in the Healing Rosie community is energy. And whenever I ask people, of flabby, foggy, and fatigue, and all the issues that we're dealing with as we're getting older and dealing with autoimmunity or perimenopause, or just the things that are coming up for us, what's the number one thing you care about? And by far, it's energy. We can want our waistlines to be thinner. We can even want our brains to work better. But when our energy is tanking and we don't have the energy to take care of our families, we don't have the energy to perform for our employers or for business owners, to run our businesses, or we don't have the energy for our relationships, it can just feel like your life is falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you relate to this. You have, your own experience that kind of led you on this path to really learn about energy. I'd love for you just to tell us a little bit about why this area has become a mission for you. Because, not only have you reclaimed your own life, but you've helped thousands and thousands of people with this.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you the super brief version because I went into the long version last time we talked. So I don't want to bore people who are tuning in for the second time. But the super quick version is I've been studying health, natural health, nutrition, exercise, lifestyle, fitness more broadly since I was about 14 years old. Initially very like fitness focused, fat loss, muscle gain, bodybuilding world sort of thing. Typical teenage boy sort of stuff. My older brother was a personal trainer, bodybuilder, mentored by professional bodybuilders. So that was kind of my world for a long time. And then did a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, had a bunch of other schooling experiences along the way, worked as a personal trainer, things like that. Did a PhD program in clinical psychology, and then ultimately came back to sort of my roots in nutrition and lifestyle. And what really shifted things for me was in my mid-20s when I got mononucleosis, Epstein-Barr virus. And I had severe chronic fatigue for about 6 months or almost a year after that. And that's really what shifted my focus, which was otherwise more attuned to things related to body composition and fitness. It shifted me more towards an interest in energy because I realized my life sucked pretty darn bad when I was chronically fatigued, and everything in my life suffered. My relationships, my friendships, my schooling, my job, everything just kind of went to crap, as a result of me being chronically fatigued. And I kind of became obsessed with chronic fatigue in the process. And that's what really created this big shift in focus for me, which is stuck till this day. I'm now 35, I'll turn 36 very soon. And for the last 10-ish years, this has really been my focus, is the science around energy. And to get a little bit more detailed, one of the big things that made me obsessed with it and made me want to start the Energy Blueprint and turn this into my career and my obsession is I basically started to see that what was out there was not very good in two ways. So one is the conventional approach. And there's research, so I'll give you a very brief summary of some research within the conventional medical approach to dealing with people with chronic fatigue. This is according to the journal American Family Physician. This is a journal on their evidence-based guidelines for how doctors should treat patients with chronic fatigue. So I'm directly citing their actual evidence-based guidelines for how actual MDs should be dealing with their fatigue patients. Basically, here's what they've got. They've got 4 tools in their tool belt, 4 recommendations for patients dealing with chronic fatigue. They have antidepressants. They have a recommendation to walk and stretch for 30 minutes a day. They have cognitive behavioral therapy, and they've got stimulants as needed. Okay, that's the best of conventional medicine, those 4 things.
Yeah.
Which, from my perspective, with a long history of studying nutrition and lifestyle and natural medicine, natural health, that seemed pretty pathetic to me. At the same time, a lot of people go to their doctor with the idea in mind that they're going to do a blood test, and the blood test is going to just sort of tell them everything they need to know about what's going wrong in their bodies. And the reality of that, again, according to the same review of the research, is over 95% of the time when they do blood panels on people with chronic fatigue, they find nothing of use that can actually change their recommendations, which again are antidepressants, recommendation to walk and stretch for 30 minutes a day, cognitive behavioral therapy, and stimulants as needed. Okay, so less than 5% of people who get blood tests actually have any finding on that test that is useful and that affects the way that the doctor treats them. Okay, so that's the conventional medical approach. And the 5% are probably things like anemia, hypothyroidism, diabetes, and so on. On the other hand, within the natural medicine community and holistic health and functional medicine community, which I've been very much a part of, and I still am a part of, the narrative there was really focused on adrenal fatigue, which is this idea that chronic stress is wearing out our adrenal glands that produce this hormone called cortisol that's really important for things like blood sugar regulation and our stress response more broadly. It also has like anti-inflammatory effects and various other roles in the body. And they've really kind of myopically focused on this one aspect of the stress response system and become obsessed with the adrenals and cortisol as if it's the be all end all of, controller of our health. And they've created this narrative of adrenal fatigue, that chronic stress wears out the adrenals, results in low cortisol, and that's the fundamental thing that causes these chronic fatigue and burnout symptoms. And as we talked about in the last podcast, or the last interview that we did, I've done an extremely comprehensive review of the literature there, and the research just absolutely does not support the idea that cortisol abnormalities or adrenal burnout or adrenal exhaustion is as a key driver of these symptoms. It just doesn't. And we can talk many more details about that, but I'm just giving the quick summary now of kind of why I got into this whole thing and why I do what I do. So that's kind of the conventional medical approach, in my view, pretty limited, and I'm trying to be diplomatic about it, but
not very useful.
It's not very useful. It's honestly pretty pathetic as far as what they have to offer people with fatigue. And then the natural health approach, which could be so much better, which could be good, I should say, has just been kind of hijacked by this theory of adrenal fatigue that is just not in line with the actual scientific evidence.
So this is a really important conversation, because what we're experiencing symptomatically, I remember times that I have experienced totally debilitating fatigue, and I've shared this quite a bit. I remember after my surgery, especially, I didn't sleep for 6 days, literally 144 hours with no sleep. And so the fatigue after that was absolutely insane. And it lasted months and months and months.
Mm-hmm.
It was like I could just never catch up. It was so stressful in the body. And, we're really quick to put labels on things. The reason why it matters, it's not to say that something's not going on. Okay. So when we say there's no adrenal fatigue, it's not to say you're crazy. Nothing is happening right now. It's to say that's just, to label it that is to label it something that's not based on science at all. So the fatigue is very real. And I would love for you, Ari, just to talk about maybe a couple of the main things that's really important for us to know about what's creating the fatigue. And I want this conversation just to kind of give everyone a little preview of what's to come. we're going to veer this conversation and talk about red light therapy, because I know this isn't the only thing that works really well, but this is something that is creating big waves in our community because people are getting unbelievable results from using red light therapy. So we're going to talk about that. But why don't you, Ari, kind of fill in the gap for us here? What is kind of the underlying cause, if you will, of this fatigue that we're experiencing, most of us?
Yeah, that's a really broad question. So I'm going to give you the quick answer to what could be a 5-hour long answer.
Which would be so fun, but utterly not practical.
Yes. Yeah, so I'll give you the super quick overview and then let you decide which rabbit holes you want to go down or which digression you go into. So the reality is that the modern world is fundamentally out of alignment with what our biology is designed for in numerous ways. So one example of this is to look at our circadian rhythm system. So we have a biological clock built into our brain. It is regulated by signals from the environment, primarily light, but also things like food timing, what you're actually eating, movement, and temperature. So we have all these different environmental signals that are regulating the circadian clock in our brain that not only controls our sleep quality and sleep depth and sleep and wake cycles, but also controls dozens of neurotransmitters and hormones and other biochemical pathways and processes in our body that impact on our energy levels, our brain function, our metabolism, our appetite regulation, our body fat regulation. I mean, almost you name it, and almost every type of dysfunction in the body, there's some research now linking it to circadian rhythm disruption. So that is one very big aspect of what's causing fatigue problems, is that when you live in a modern world that's not giving you the right environmental signals into this clock in your brain that regulates all these neurotransmitters and hormones that impact on energy and sleep and metabolism and so on, then what happens is you get dysregulation of the neurotransmitters and hormones that regulate brain function and energy and sleep and so on. And that's fundamentally one of the main drivers of both the modern day fatigue epidemic and the modern day sleep epidemic, because those two things are two sides of the same coin that are linked by the circadian clock in your brain. So to the degree one is suffering, the other tends to suffer as well. So that's a big piece of it right there. Nutrition, of course. I assume everybody listening to this understands that the way that most people eat is very problematic and creates nutritional deficiencies, nutritional toxicities. Obviously, refined carbohydrates, refined fats, processed foods more broadly are not only nutrient deficient, but are creating nutrient excesses and have all kinds of ingredients with toxicity that impacts on gut health, that impacts on brain health, that causes chronic inflammation, immune dysregulation, mitochondrial toxicity, and so on. I won't go into all the details there because I'm assuming a solid level of familiarity with nutrition knowledge among this group. Then we have light more broadly. Light relates to the circadian rhythm, certainly. That's the main controller of our circadian rhythm, but there's also all these other biochemical pathways and ways that light is bioactive in humans that most people really don't know much about. So the one that people do know about is vitamin D, right? We know that we go out in the sun, we get ultraviolet light on our skin. It creates vitamin D, which is actually a hormone, not a vitamin. And that hormone impacts on calcium regulation, but it also impacts on the regulation, the expression of over 2,000 genes in the body that affect inflammatory pathways, immune pathways, and many, many other things in our body. Now, that's not where the light story ends and where the importance of light, sort of begins and ends. There's many more aspects of this theory that most people are totally unfamiliar with. Red and near infrared light are a huge part of this. There's over 5,000 studies on that topic now, showing it can impact on everything from skin anti-aging to inflammation levels in the body to gland health and hormonal health to immune function to fat loss to muscle gain to recovery to brain health and many, many more things. And I think we're going to cover that in depth. So I'll just keep it surface level for now. There's also other pathways when it comes to light. So we know that far infrared light heats up our tissues and can improve circulation and blood vessel dilation, and therefore oxygen and nutrient delivery to the tissues, which means more efficient energy production. And there's other layers. So for example, light has been shown to impact directly on neurotransmitter levels in the brain, dopamine, serotonin, and another one called orexin that most people are not familiar with, all play a key role in mood, brain function, and energy levels. And in addition to that, we also know that it can also impact on another system of the body called the melanocortin system, which is, if people have any knowledge of that at all, it's that they know that the melanocortin system stimulates something called melanocyte stimulating hormone, which basically helps build more melanin in the skin. That's that dark pigment that creates a tan that protects your skin from sun damage. But it does a lot more than that too. So in addition to just creating a tan, it also profoundly impacts on immune function, inflammation, and appetite regulation, believe it or not. So sun exposure on our skin is impacting on all these different systems, the circadian rhythm, all these different neurotransmitters and hormones directly on our mitochondria. So inflammation.
I'm hearing you talk about this, and I'm thinking about all the years of them telling us to put on sunscreen, wear hats, cover up when we're out in the sun. I mean, it's like we're socialized to do the exact opposite thing to what our bodies need.
Yeah, that advice is on par with the advice that used to be around in like the 1950s, where you'd see doctors on TV smoking cigarettes, talking about how great cigarettes are for controlling your appetite and other aspects of health. Sun avoidance is, and actually it's funny that I use that analogy because there's actually a study that came out a couple years ago on a group of about 30,000 Swedish women, where they followed them for like 20 years and tracked mortality risk in people with high sun exposure and low sun exposure. And what they found is that sun avoidance is as big of a risk factor for all-cause mortality, dying of any cause, as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So it is really, really horrifically bad advice to stay out of the sun and constantly keep covered up. We need sun exposure. It is good for us in so many ways that most people have absolutely no idea about. And I'm happy to talk more about those. But that's just to name a few factors. Obviously, gut health is profoundly important. We know there's links with the gut and brain, the gut-brain axis. We know there's a gut mitochondria axis where what's going on in the gut directly impacts on our mitochondria, the energy generators in our cells. Obviously, gut health is a topic unto itself. Toxins are certainly a big factor. There's over 72,000 man-made toxins now in the modern environment. We're exposed to a huge amount of them. There's analysis of umbilical cord blood, for example, showing that even in umbilical cord blood of newborn babies, there's already detectable amounts of something like over 300 different man-made chemicals. So, and we know, a lot of these things have been studied. Certainly not all 72,000 of them have been studied very well, but in the context of human health, but we know that a lot of the most common ones absolutely do disrupt hormones. They poison mitochondria. They are absolutely affecting our bodies in profoundly harmful ways. And then we also know, the way we regulate our brains, the stress of the modern world combined with the way we manage our own mind states or don't manage them in many cases is a big factor. So conscious sort of operation of your brain. And then hormesis, which is another topic, my favorite topic actually, which is the concept of metabolic stress, transient metabolic stressors, and how those create adaptations in our body that ultimately confer profound health benefits. So exercise is one example of a hormetic stressor, something that is temporarily stressing the body, but ultimately creates adaptations in the body that confer increased resilience and resistance to a broad range of stressors that ultimately translate into things like improved energy levels, improved mood, improved sleep, improved resilience to stress, and of course, resistance to a huge number of diseases and increased lifespan. And a big part of how those hormetic stressors work is at the mitochondrial level by literally still stimulating the mitochondria to grow bigger and stronger and to create more mitochondria from scratch, what's called mitochondrial biogenesis. And that process, mitochondrial health, is really integral to this whole story of not only energy, but also resistance to disease and longevity more broadly. Yeah. So that's kind of the broad overview of some of the biggest factors in what's causing the fatigue epidemic.
So I have a couple questions for you just based on what you just shared, because I'm always thinking of like, how do we practically apply this? A couple of things. First of all, you talked about the timing of when we eat as being really important. I'm thinking about intermittent fasting, which is, a really popular concept that is being talked about a lot in our space right now. And then there's a lot of ways to do intermittent fasting. For women particularly, I've heard a lot of women talk about how, the idea of fasting and not starting to eat until 11 a.m. or even 1 p.m., depending on, who you're talking to, just seems to wreck them. Do you have a recommendation as far as that eating window of when it's optimal if we're really trying to optimize our energy?
Yeah. So let's start off just with sort of some definitions to avoid confusion. So if you're eating every day, it's probably better to not refer to that as intermittent fasting, but the more proper term is time-restricted feeding.
Okay.
Okay. And so we can talk about what is the feeding window and the fasting window on a daily basis. And so there's time-restricted feeding, and then there's intermittent fasting. And I think a better definition of intermittent fasting is really like if every once in a while you subject yourself to a 24-hour period or longer of fasting. Now, at some point, there's sort of a blurry line that not everybody agrees upon. Like if you only eat one meal a day, some people call that intermittent fasting. Other people call it just a really narrow feeding window and time restriction.
Some people just call it starvation.
Yeah.
Depends on who you're talking to.
Right. But so I just want to be clear, because there's a lot of people who, for example, are consuming like 2 or 3 meals a day during an 8-hour feeding window or a 10-hour feeding window and say that they're intermittent fasting. And that's not intermittent fasting. That is a time-restricted feeding. And time-restricted feeding is wonderful. And there's lots and lots of research coming out backing it up. And we know that it is likely a very important part of health for a variety of different reasons. One is how it impacts on circadian rhythm. So just as light signals control the circadian clock in our brain, food signals do also, because most people don't eat during the sleeping hours, right? And well, let me rephrase that. That's not quite totally true. Most animals don't eat during the nighttime hours if they're nocturnal animals, or if they're diurnal animals, that are awake during the day, asleep during the night. They don't sleep during the dark period, right? They don't eat during the darkness period. They eat during the day, the time that they're awake, and then when it gets dark, it's time to go to sleep and rest and not eat. Now, those cycles are wired into our body by millions of years of evolution. But in the modern artificially lit man-made world that we live in with, man-made lighting in our houses and all these electronic devices, we've slowly stopped honoring a lot of these evolutionary traditions. So it's common for people to eat very late at night now. It's common for people to even eat in the middle of the night during the sleeping hours. But what is really common is for people to consume food almost from the moment they wake up till the moment they go to bed. And it's also been shown that most people are not even conscious of the fact that they're doing this because they have a selective memory about what exactly they're putting into their body, or they don't realize that certain of the things that they're consuming actually have calories and count as food. So for example, if you wake up and have a coffee with sugar and cream, or sugar or cream, like first thing in the morning, that's calories, that's food. If at night you have some kind of tea or something with sugar in it, or you have a little snack before bed, that's food. So your feeding window is the time from your first bite of food to the last bite of food over the course of the day. And it turns out most people's feeding window in the modern Western world, in the United States specifically, is about 13 to 16 hours a day. Now, if you think there's 24 hours of the day, and most of us are in bed for, let's say, about 8 of those, if somebody's got a 15 or 16 hour feeding window, again, it means they're eating something or consuming some calorie containing food from basically the moment they wake up almost to the moment they go to bed. Now, that is a problem for a huge number of reasons. One is it disrupts the circadian clock because food timing, like light, regulates the circadian clock. So you're disrupting the circadian clock, therefore you disrupt your sleep-wake cycles, you disrupt the quality of your sleep, you disrupt the neurotransmitters and hormones that are dependent on a proper fluctuation over the course of the 24-hour cycle of day and night, of light and darkness. And in turn, you dysregulate a lot of these hormones and neurotransmitters that regulate mood and brain function and energy and sleep and so on. And many different hormones. So for example, cortisol being one, many other hormones in addition to cortisol, like testosterone, follow a diurnal curve where there's a rhythm, high in the morning, for example, low in the evening, okay? Both cortisol and testosterone follow a rhythm like that, among many other hormones that we could talk about. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is something called autophagy, which people are starting to talk more about now. And basically this is recycling at the cellular level of junk, of accumulated, damaged, and worn out and broken down cell parts and mitochondria. Every day, just by normal use of our body, we accumulate some junk in our cells and we accumulate some damage on our mitochondria. And every night during the time we're sleeping, which we should be in a fasted state, this process of autophagy, which is a catabolic process, it's a tissue breaking down a process where we're breaking down tissue, needs to happen and is designed to happen. But if your feeding window is too long every day and you're not really in a fasted state when you're sleeping, if, for example, you just consumed food very recently before bed, what that's going to do, it's going to suppress and limit the time that you have in autophagy every night. So your body's not going to do that process very well of breaking down those worn out and damaged cell parts and mitochondria. And what happens if you don't do that every night on an ongoing basis? Well, you start to accumulate more and more damaged cell parts and damaged mitochondria in your cells. Damaged and dysfunctional mitochondria don't produce energy very well. So this is a big problem. And this is how cellular energy production ties directly back into circadian rhythm. Now, there's many, many other mechanisms we could talk about there, but that's, those are some of the big ones as far as time restricted feeding and how that affects cellular energy production and our energy levels more broadly.
Do you have a recommendation on how big that window should be and when it should begin each day?
Maximum 12 hours. And ideally, 8 to 10 is probably better. Going less than 8 hours a day as far as your feeding window, if you do it occasionally, probably a good idea. If you do it on a daily basis, it probably is going to have more negatives over time compared to like an 8 to 10 hour feeding window. So the benefits of time restricted feeding probably max out between the window of 8 to 10 hours. And then going less than that, you're probably going to start to have more of a potential for unwanted side effects. So that's the window as far as the specific time of day that it should happen. To some extent, this is personal preference because there are some pragmatic aspects of this. Like for a lot of people, it's just way easier to skip breakfast than it is to skip dinner. Or it's way easier to have a very light breakfast and have a much heavier dinner. But if we're talking about optimal based on the current state of the actual scientific literature, The literature generally says stacking more of your calories towards the early part of the day is better than stacking more of your calories towards the later part of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one potentially viable option if you can't have a big breakfast is to have a big lunch. But the research is very consistent. There's lots of different studies that have tested this in different ways, but the overall body of evidence makes it pretty clear that all things being equal, it's better to have more of your food in the earlier part of the day than the later part of the day. Mm-hmm. So in an ideal world, I would say 8 to 10 hour feeding window, with that being stacked towards the early part of the day. So let's say 7:30 a.m. to, whatever that is, 5:30.
3:30.
Something like, 3:30 to 5:30. 3:30 is probably extreme for most people, but if you're going to do an 8-hour feeding window, then maybe you do 9:30 to 5:30 or something like that.
Yeah. So let's dive in here and talk a little bit about red light therapy. You've actually written a book on it, and I'm looking around here like, do I have it on my desk? Because I've just seen it recently, but I don't know where it is in my house. It's been a topic of conversation around here. I've been doing a little study, but why don't you talk to us a little bit about why you love red light therapy so much and why it's having such profound implications for people when it comes to their energy and so many other things.
Yeah, well, it's blowing up in popularity right now. People are finally starting to discover it. I've been reading and studying about and using red light therapy for about 10 years now. And I've just always found it utterly fascinating, and it's just this kind of bizarre thing that I was hinting at earlier, that light has these profound effects on the way our cells function. And most people are just totally unaware of it. So most people only know the story around vitamin D and sunlight, but they don't realize that there are other bioactive wavelengths of light that are literally penetrating through your skin inches deep into your body, where they are directly interacting with cellular structures in a way that control the expression of control how much energy is being produced by your mitochondria, your cellular energy generators. They're impacting on the gene expression of all these different genes in those cells. That's in a tissue specific way. So whether it's in the muscle tissue or the brain tissue, or glands and things like that, or in the blood. And so you're getting all these profound effects. You're decreasing oxidative stress at the cellular level. You can modulate enzymes that impact on fat loss. You can modulate compounds that impact on brain health, impact on muscle recovery and strength and performance and skin anti-aging and collagen production. It has all these kind of amazing effects that most people just have never even heard of and have no concept of. Most people think of light as, I turn on a light switch so I can see in a room. Light is the opposite of darkness. A light gives me the opportunity to see things, but they don't realize that photons of light are penetrating inches deep into their body, where they're modulating the expression of their genes and impacting on different cellular structures and all these different biochemicals in their cells. Mm-hmm. So the reality is light is a drug. And when we understand that our bodies are designed by millions of years of evolution to need the right light nutrients in the right doses, just as we need different kinds of food and nutrients from food in the right doses, then light takes on a whole new meaning. Mm-hmm. And red and near-infrared light are the type of light that penetrate, that really they're the only type of light that penetrate inside of our body to any significant degree. So for example, when you're a kid, or if you watch a kid take a flashlight, shine it up to their fingers, and you look at what light actually comes through the other side of the fingers, like their fingernails, you'll notice it's red tinted. And the reason why is that all the other wavelengths of light are being absorbed at the skin level. They don't really pass through the skin, or they maybe pass just through the skin in some cases, but don't go much deeper than that. Red and near infrared light, which is another kind of light that's not visible to the human eye, but it's right next to red light on the electromagnetic spectrum. They pass through our tissues quite easily, like up to about 2.5 inches deep into our body. And again, when they do that, they directly impact on the way our cells function. So a few of the specific mechanisms of how this works. One is they interact with our mitochondria where there's a little receptor called a photoacceptor on the mitochondria called cytochrome C oxidase. And this little thing, cytochrome C oxidase, is involved in how efficiently our mitochondria produce energy at the cellular level. Photons of red and near infrared light basically allow that cytochrome C oxidase to accept oxygen more efficiently into the mitochondria, where they can utilize that oxygen and pump out energy more efficiently. So that's one mechanism of how it works. Another mechanism of how it works is through hormesis. It actually creates, much like exercise, it creates a transient burst of free radicals at the cellular level, which sounds like a bad thing until you realize that hormetic stress, every type of hormetic stress, whether we're talking about exercise or sauna exposure or cold showers, or any number of other things that we know are strongly associated with beneficial effects, all create this transient short-term burst of free radicals in the cell. And in response to that, and this is why it turns into a good thing, in response to this burst of free radicals, the cell, the mitochondria, upregulate the internal antioxidant defense system. And that is ultimately what actually protects the cell against oxidative damage. And it's hundreds of times more powerful than taking antioxidants, antioxidant pills. What you really want to do if you want to protect your cells from damage is you want to build up the internal antioxidant defense system. And hormetic stress and near infrared light therapy is one very effective way of doing that. And then one of the other mechanisms is it directly impacts on gene expression in a tissue-specific way. So we have genes that are stored in the nucleus of our cell. It turns out that mitochondria can sense what's going on in the environment in such a way that it communicates, it signals back to the nucleus of the cell in a process called retrograde signaling. It signals to the nucleus which genes should be expressed and to what degrees. And what red and near infrared light therapy does is it signals to suppress inflammation in almost every tissue. And then in a tissue-specific way, it tends to upregulate growth factors. So for example, on the skin, it upregulates collagen and elastin production. And that's why it has anti-aging and anti-wrinkle effects. In the muscle tissue, it upregulates growth factors and like IGF-1 that are involved in muscle protein synthesis and muscle growth. In the brain, it upregulates nerve growth factor, NGF, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So you get all these tissue-specific upregulations, whatever the growth factors are in those specific tissues of the body, whether it's brain or muscle or whatever, you tend to get upregulation of factors that are responsible for growth and development of those tissues and rejuvenation of those tissues. So so that's kind of a broad overview of how it works. There's also a couple more speculative mechanisms that are not yet totally proven of how it works, but I'd say those are the three really solid proven mechanisms of how it works.
So you actually have a book on this. So I just want to direct everyone to just go search on, it's Red Light Therapy, right? Is that the name of your book on Amazon?
Yeah, if they go to Amazon and search Red Light Therapy, or they can look up the Ultimate Guide to Red Light Therapy or my name, it'll come up.
Yeah, then it'll come up. So if this is something that's really interesting to you, you could definitely do a deeper dive. And what I love about Ari in general is that he does all this fabulous research and really helps to distill it in one place, because it's very time consuming to really go hunt all of this down. I'm curious, Ari, I'm thinking about, I have a light from my friend Eric, who I think you've partnered up with in the past too over at redtherapy.co. And it's a smaller light. I didn't get his full body light. It's a smaller light that hangs on the back of the door. And I have kind of a little recipe of what one of the practitioners that I've been working with has told me to do. If someone were like kind of getting started with red therapy and we wanted to make it really easy for them to not get lost in all the recipes and all the, ways that you could do it, what would your like quick and dirty recommendation be for how someone used their red light?
So it depends on what you're using it for. And so there's some complexity here, but I'm going to simplify it into a very easy to understand framework.
Great.
So there's a bunch of different goals one could have. They could be using it for skin anti-aging effects. They could be using it to enhance exercise performance, sport performance. They could be using it to enhance recovery after workouts. They could be using it to enhance fat loss. They could be using it to support hair regrowth, enhance brain health, improve fat loss. There's a range of different things that someone could want to use this for. And how you use it depends a little bit on that. But the most basic guideline that I can give is if you are using it for superficial tissues, so like the skin or near the skin, so this could be skin anti-aging, or it could be treating wounds, which red light therapy and near infrared light therapy also support faster healing of wounds, whether it's like cuts and scrapes or diabetic ulcers or anything really, for the most part. If it's a superficial, close to the surface tissue, you want to use the device from somewhere around 12 inches away, maybe 18 inches away at the most, and somewhere between 3 to 10 minutes, probably, depending on the device you have. But if you have like the red, I'm giving guidelines based on the Red Therapy Co. light, or there's a couple similarly powered devices. But Red Therapy Co. is probably the cheapest one as far as bang for the buck for that amount of power. So if you're trying to treat deeper tissues, so let's say you want to treat muscles, or you're looking for fat loss, or you're trying to treat the brain, so you need to get the light through the actual skull bone into the brain, and it's hard for light to penetrate the skull. You need a pretty high powerful light. You need to use it from a closer distance in this case. And because so much of the light is not making it through the skull bone in that case, you need to probably use it for a longer period of time so more light is actually delivered to the brain. So there's some nuances here, as you can tell, as far as dosing, depending on what you're using it for. But the general recommendation for these purposes, for enhancing muscle tissue, fat loss, healing tendons, brain health, treating some of these deeper tissues, you want to use the light from a closer distance. So somewhere between like 4 to 6 inches away is ideal. And probably using it in the neighborhood of like 5 to 15, maybe up to 20 minutes to get a stronger dose and deliver more light to those deep tissues.
Is it okay to have, like, if you're maybe need to do some work on your spine or your back, just actually resting on the light, or do you need a little barrier of space between you and the light?
So, good question. So the barrier of space is actually only because of EMFs, because every electronic device has some EMFs, whether our computer screens, our laptops, a hair dryer, your cell phone, TV, everything, your blender in your kitchen, everything's got some electromagnetic fields. And especially when you're talking about a powerful electronic device, often they have very significant electromagnetic fields. Like most people might be shocked to measure the electromagnetic fields around their blender or their hair dryer. Basically, if you go out about 4 or 5 inches from one of these devices, you eliminate EMFs. So EMFs become a non-issue as soon as you do that. You can go closer. I certainly have gone a lot closer and literally put it on my skin directly. It's just a question of your sensitivity to EMFs. And really, it's still just somewhat of a question. Like, we don't yet have really clear data on whether like a 15 or 20 minute exposure to a significant magnetic field from an electronic device like a hair dryer or a red light device, or standing next to a TV, or holding your cell phone next to your ear. We don't really know yet how harmful those EMFs are. And there's really quite a bit of debate about that in the scientific community. But my recommendation is basically just to err on the side of safety.
Right.
And say, since we don't know whether those EMFs are harmful, let's just eliminate them altogether by just moving 4 inches away.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us, Ari. I know that you are being really generous with our community and offering your training class around energy for the next 10 days. So I have a link here if you're watching on Facebook, up in the status. If you're watching on YouTube, it's down in the description, where you guys can go check out Ari's training class on energy. And I'm also going to be, if you're on the mailing list, you'll be getting an email about this. But this is a really good time of year. I kind of feel like we're moving into the school year, and it's almost like a second new year for everyone. You know, kids go back to school and routines change, and we tend to reclaim a little bit of time for self-care. Really want everyone to be thinking about what you can do to make changes in your life and really support your body and your biology and having more energy. I think it's fundamentally the thing that all of us need. I mean, just for the health journey alone, if you don't have the energy to sustain it, you're not going to make very much progress, you know, but really for our quality of life and everything that we want to contribute to the world, this is a super important topic. So
Yeah, absolutely.
time with us today, Ari. I love it when you come by, and I'm sure we'll be having you on again soon. And if you guys have questions for Ari, drop it in the comments below and I'll tag him and make sure that he gets back to you with answers to your questions. So
yeah, thanks so much for having me, Misty. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And you guys have a great evening.